Let's now bring in Abdullah Al-Arian. He's an associate professor of history at Georgetown University here in Qatar. And so attacks against humanitarian workers, their premises, their assets violate international law. How worrying is it that we continue to see this happen?
Well, I mean, this is the result of being able to do this for 11 months with complete and total impunity. There has been absolutely no accountability for the many similar attacks. Even the sense of even needing a justification, right? I mean, if again, we've become so desensitized to this level of atrocity against schools, against hospitals, et cetera, that we forget the fact that this actually, going back to the very beginning, was something that was deemed completely off limits. The Israeli forces at one point would have to make arguments in cases and talk about the reasoning behind targeting these facilities. All of that has now been done away with to the point where it's become so routine to be able to do this.
And is that a shift that has taken place during the course of this 11-month war, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think because the way that this war has unfolded, the way that the genocidal campaign has unfolded is one in which Israel continues to test the limits of what's acceptable internationally. And as long as there has been absolutely no accountability, no intervention externally from any actors, of course, led by the United Nations itself, which sees itself constantly targeted in this way, but also, of course, all of the various countries that have continued to shield Israel from any accountability, that as a result, it continues to escalate its level of violence.
Just to be clear, that the international framework exists to enforce accountability. UN member states are meant to protect humanitarian workers, and I think this is called for in UN Resolution 2730, which was adopted earlier this year. So they can hold perpetrators to account for violations if the willingness is there.
Exactly. I think you touched on it right there at the end, that we know what the law states. The law is very extremely clear about this issue, but the law is only as strong as the political will that exists to defend it, to apply it, to enforce it. And we haven't seen any enforcement mechanisms whatsoever coming, again, out of the United Nations Security Council, which, of course, is the body that would necessarily have to take action. The United States has used its veto multiple times to shield Israel from any actionable resolutions. And on top of that, of course, all of the regional actors that continue to basically sit and watch as we talk about, ceasefire deals and negotiations that have led nowhere, that have simply acted as a kind of a distraction from what's actually unfolding in Gaza.
Do you think it's also quite sad and unfortunate, the lack of attention that local humanitarian workers get? Because we do see occasionally this kind of international condemnation when international staff are targeted, as we saw with the World Central Kitchen staff in April. But, most of the aid workers that are leaving their homes, if they have homes still in Gaza every day, and going to help their fellow Palestinians, they are national staff, and they don't get anything like that kind of attention.
That's exactly right. I mean, the complete and utter dehumanization of Palestinians in particular has been very much a part and parcel of this entire war. I mean, this is exactly how genocidal campaigns unfold. It starts with stripping the people who are being, massacred, exterminated in large numbers to this degree. We're talking about tens of thousands, if not likely hundreds of thousands of casualties over the last 11 months, and irrespective of whether they work for an international agency like the UN, or if they're journalists, for instance, another protected category, or medical workers, or people across so many different sectors that are crucial to the survival of Palestinians during this exact moment. And they're the ones that are being targeted most directly, quite often in these attacks.
Israel's bombing has turned Gaza into the deadliest place in the world to deliver aid, because hospitals, ambulances, schools, shelters, convoys, all these bits of civilian infrastructure have been targeted and destroyed. Do you envisage a time where perhaps there will be no international presence, or very little international presence in Gaza to help the people there?
Well, I think one really important element to this that should be highlighted is the fact that we know, even predating this last year, that the State of Israel, along with even segments of supporters within the United States, have targeted UNRWA specifically as an agency, as a body that they deem to be is essentially standing in the way of their aims in Palestine. And so there have been attempts to defund it, to delegitimize it, to criminalize it, and even to the extent that we're seeing its workers targeted and killed in this way. And so I think the idea that essentially attempting to revoke the status of Palestinians as refugees, let's also consider the fact that more than 2/3 of Palestinians living in Gaza are either refugees, survivors of the Nakba, or their descendants, right? So this is a agency that has been absolutely crucial, not just to this daily survival of Palestinians, but also to the idea that they retain the right to return to their homes, right? This is something that's been enshrined in international law, in UN resolutions, and of course, part of this campaign has been both, again, by Israel as well as within some segments of the United States to try and essentially undo the Palestinian claims to their own nationhood.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Abdullah Al-Arian. Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.